Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray, hovering over you like a black triangle in a deserted field. Visit the mothership at intothefrayradio.com. There you can find all the episodes, the blog posts, ITF gear, and sign up for the free guest newsletter. The weekly show is, of course, always free and available in all podcatchers, but if you'd like to support the show, and why wouldn't you, go to the website and click Become an Insider, which in turn gets you extra content each and every month. And by the way, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review in your listening platform of choice, Cosmic Karma shall be yours. Be part of the discussion by joining the interactive ITF Facebook group. Follow on Twitter at ITF_radio and Instagram. If you have an experience that you'd like to share, email Shannon at intothefrayradio.com. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you would be so kind, buckle up your safety belts. Put that tray table in the upright position. Liftoff is upon us.
Hola.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Fantabulous.
So Kari's a little under the weather still, huh?
Yeah, it's been, it's that con crud.
Oh, right.
It hit her and Elizabeth Abbott pretty good. We were right under an air conditioner vent at the big convention center down in Fort Lauderdale, which was an amazing convention. We had a grand time. Had a huge turnout for my panel, and a lot of them came downstairs and immediately bought the book, which was always handy. But those poor two girls, they were getting froze to death, and Elizabeth got it first, and then Kari got it. I was downing emergency like crazy.
Yeah.
And so it kind of tickled my throat, but I dodged it. Knock on wood here.
I remember Sam talking about that a long time ago when we were doing one of the intros, and he said, yeah, like when you go to a Comic-Con, it's just as bad as just sitting on a plane for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. You're just kind of waiting to get something, but emergencies, those are wonderful little things.
Yeah, when we were doing research for the Hellview book, and I was hanging out at the same time my mother was in Bon Secours, which is one of the places we talked about with our ghosts. I was getting to know the nurses, and I was asking them, everybody in this place is sick. How do you all never get sick? And they all pulled out emergency packets, every one of them, every day. They're like, once in the morning, once at night. Nothing else works.
Yeah, I guess they have the chewables now, but it seems like the packets are like 1,000 milligrams, and then the chewables, it's like 2 of them are 500. So, and that's supposed to be your dose, but you're like, well, wait a minute, I want to have the normal dose of 1,000 milligrams, so I got to pop a lot more of those things. Yeah, they work really well.
Yeah, a lot of people, down them in the water bottles. I pop them like pixie sticks. I just down it down my throat. And
nice. You're like, nobody needs a water bottle around here.
Why waste water like that? Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sorry to have you go through this again. I mean, I know that it's your book and you know it inside and out and don't mind talking about it, of course. But, and I know that the insiders, nobody but the insiders knew about this, but I was all excited, and I'm like, here's some screenshots, and the video's going to come out tomorrow. And it was dashed twice, everybody, because the Snagit Capture recording program that I had just updated, I paid to update it as well, which is really a double slap in the face. It did not save the video, and then because the program wouldn't let me capture the audio through my microphone like I usually do, I took a chance and I recorded through my speakers, which you should never do because there was a god-awful echo, so I couldn't even air the audio recording of that video that we attempted. So I'm putting Mark through the paces again for this edition 2 of Freaky Florida, so I apologize.
Oh, never a problem. Like I said, we had those other sound issues that day. There was lots. It was not meant to be. But,
no, it wasn't.
And getting me to shut up about my book is the hardest part. So,
hey, you're a great interview. I've always told you that from the very, very beginning. Yeah, so today, everybody, of course, it's Mark Muncy back on with us. And Kari, like we just mentioned, is under the weather, so she's going to sit this one out. But we are back for Freaky Florida Edition 2. And if you want to hear Edition 1, that is Into the Fray, episode 141. And in that, we covered The Devil's Tree, the I-4 Dead Zone, Haunted Disney, Dogman, and of course, we can't forget that lovely lantern-carrying skunk ape. And if folks want to go back and listen to, of course, the book that started it all, Eerie, Florida, listen to the episodes on Into the Fray. Those were 81, 94, and 104. All right, well, yeah, let's jump in here with the stories that I picked for Freaky Florida Edition 2. And if you don't mind, good Sir Mark, let's start with the head of Osceola and the ghosts of the oldest city. And this is, of course, in St. Augustine.
Yes, St. Augustine, the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement city in Florida. You have to do all those wonderful things to narrow it down because there's arguments about a lot of those titles. But it is still, the oldest city in North America of European descent. And we talked about it in Eerie, Florida. There's a lot. I mean, the whole town has ghost city, ghost tours, ghosts all over the place. One of the things that first set me off on my paranormal journeys happened in St. Augustine when my youngest daughter encountered a ghost there, and we described that in Eerie, Florida. Mm-hmm. And that's her earliest memory. She still remembers that. That's one of her earliest memories. So, but what we're going to talk about today, we talk about all the ghosts, and the book's got lots of ghosts. I know your listeners love the ghost stories, so definitely check that out. But what we're going to talk about today is the Castillo de San Marcos, the big famous fort. It's the big castle. It's been there, since the mid 1500s. So it predates Plymouth Rock. During the Civil War, it was renamed Fort Marion. It was used as a jail. It's been used to fight pirates. It's made out of coquina stone, which is like a muddy concrete made out of shell and mud that the Spanish were very famous for using in Spain. And when they got here to Florida, they found a very similar material, so that's what they built their fort out of. And it's survived hurricanes and pirate invasions and everything, and it's still there. And one of the cool things about it is when cannons, the English attack or the French attacked or pirates attacked, and cannons would shoot at the walls. Instead of blowing away chunks of the wall, cannonballs just kind of sink into it. And then, and what they do is they go outside in the night and they would actually dig out the cannonballs and then they would fire them back at the other guys the next day, at the attackers. So kind of a fun little factoid about this castle. But
it's just a catcher. That's all. They're like, we're going to collect your cannonballs. Thank you for firing those at us.
And actually, if you go there, you still see where they puttied up holes, and stuff. But there are still probably cannonballs stuck in the walls. I'm sure somebody would deal with that. So we talk about Judge Stickney. He's a ghost there. That's one of the things we talk about. But we're going to talk about one of the things at the fort. There was a Indian, a Seminole warrior, whose name was Billy Powell, and he was one of the fighters. Sorry, I'm looking at something over here.
That's
Give me
okay.
1 second. Sorry. All right. Anyway, he acquired the name of Osceola, which is a translation for black drink singer. And most historians say that this comes from a rite where Seminole warriors would drink this black liquid that was made of holly leaves. And he must have done it, which usually causes, violent purging or something, but he did it, singing afterwards instead of retching. So he got this, reputation almost immediately. Anyway, the Seminoles were being kicked out of Florida by Adams-Onis Treaty and the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. So the Seminole Indians agreed to give up their land in Florida and move away. Well, not all of them signed it, and not all of them agreed to it is the problem. So Andrew Jackson, one of our early presidents, signed the Indian Removal Act. And what he did was this required the removal of all Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Seminole tribes and move them out of Florida and into what he had created, the Indian Territory, pretty much Oklahoma. Many of the Seminoles who lived here in Florida had been refugees from a couple wars, including a war with the Creek tribe, where they were going to be being forced to move next to. And, they didn't want to move, out of this land that they'd been fighting for to go into another land where they would probably be at war with people again very soon. So they started fighting back. And Osceola became pretty much this huge, famous leader of his people. He was an accomplished tactician. He beat one general at the Battle of Withlacoochee, did numerous ambushes, and and kept moving, so nobody could ever seem to find him. They thought he was like a ghost. He was so good at hiding and stuff. So this one general for the U.S. decides he's got a plan, and he agrees to get Osceola to come to St. Augustine, and he's going to meet him under truce. And what he does that, though, while they come under truce, he catches them and locks them up in Fort Marion, or the Castillo de San Marcos, and he's captured them. Now, most people thought that was kind of a bad deal, and definitely not done with honor or anything. But in the meantime, Osceola becomes a tourist attraction. People start flocking to St. Augustine to see these captured Indians and this famous warrior. And while he's there, he pairs up with a doctor who's been hired to take care of him and the Indians, a guy named Dr. Whedon. He is there to take care of the soldiers, and a lot of diseases going around at this time. They generally just lumped it all into a thing called Florida fever, and it was pretty much yellow fever and malaria and all those fun diseases that we all know and love. But anyway, so he was treating the soldiers at the fort, and he also started treating Osceola and his men. There was an escape attempt in the mid-1830s, and a bunch of the warriors escaped. But Osceola was too weak. He couldn't escape. So, and a lot of the women and stuff like that couldn't escape. So at this point, they decided to head out. And, they need to move these guys, and they're going to move them to Fort Moultrie up in Charleston, South Carolina. And so before he leaves St. Augustine, artists and more tourists show up, and they are all trying to see the great Indian. So they had Osceola pose in all these paintings with all these weird costumes and stuff like that. And Whedon had this diary that said he had all these wonderful times talking to him and all this, and Osceola just wouldn't take treatments from him, and he said it was time for him to go. So they get up to Fort Moultrie, and he's not there long before Osceola dies. Dr. Whedon asks for a few more minutes with his dear friend. And he decides to take himself a souvenir from the great warrior chief, and he cuts off his head. and puts it in a jar and takes it home with him when he returns back to St. Augustine. Now, nobody knew about this for a little bit, but he decides after a while he's got away with it, so he puts the jar up in his drugstore in St. Augustine, and a lot of people start recognizing it, especially a lot of the soldiers who had once guarded, Osceola, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, that's Osceola's head." And he starts bragging about it, and then there's the great story, and that he used to like to, when his kids were being bad, he would lock them in their bedroom with the head at the foot of the bed, staring at them all night. That was his punishment for the kids when they were needed discipline.
Yes, take note. What not to do as a parent. I wonder what the superstitions were. I mean, it's very specific, like, beheading someone just to keep it as a souvenir. I wonder what the superstitions were in the Native American culture as far as that. Is that like an automatic curse on the person and their family? Or I wonder what that entails.
Well, we've talked to Al Going Back, one of our favorite people. He's our go-to for the information on the Seminole tribe. We've mentioned him a few times. He's a Bram Stoker winning author. He helped me with this book. He helps me with a lot of books. He's a mentor and a guide, and he also knows about as many ghost stories and stuff about Florida as I do, if he doesn't know more. But he says that is definitely, after you're dead, what happens to your body is not as important, but it's still, it was a definite desecration, and, definitely, not good. Well, when Whedon died, before he died, he gave the head to one of his sons as a wedding present.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's, I don't think they registered for that, but
probably not. I don't think Bed Bath & Beyond carries that either. I mean, these days, right?
Head of Osceola is definitely not on there. Yeah. You might look on eBay. You never know. But anyway,
no kidding.
So when Whedon died, his son's like, okay, I can get rid of this damn thing now. And he gives it to his mentor, a doctor at the medical college in New York. And they kept the head hidden because they didn't want it stolen.
Yeah.
And but then a fire ravaged the college in the mid 1860s, and that was the last time anybody saw the head. And it's been presumed destroyed in the blaze, although there are stories. Now, only like in the last, I want to say it's like 10 years, did the National Park Service finally actually examine the grave of Osceola just outside of Fort Moultrie. And they did uncover the headless skeleton, which confirmed that Dr. Whedon really did have the head of Osceola.
So Fort Moultrie, is that in fact around St. Augustine or in St. Augustine?
No, Fort Moultrie is actually up in North Carolina where they moved him.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's where he died.
Okay.
They buried him right outside that fort.
Oh, right. He was taken up to NC. That's right.
Yep.
So stories of the head. What are a couple of the rumors as far as where it might be? Have you heard anything as far as a location?
Well, some people say that it actually got sent to the Smithsonian, and then they still have it in an archive and it's mislabeled.
I always think of the Smithsonian as having kind of like a Hangar 49 kind of a thing where they have like the Ark of the Covenant and all of this stuff that is supposed to just be completely gone. And I just imagine this like on Indiana Jones and I didn't like that one. The Crystal Skull, it wasn't my favorite Indiana Jones. But when he walks in and it's just everything. There's Area 51 stuff and you got the Ark of the Covenant and everything is in there. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be it would be crazy. There was what was that? What, Warehouse 31 and then what was that one? Oh the show they just canceled, The Librarians.
Yes.
That was amazing. That was a great show.
Yes, that's exactly it. It makes you wonder because maybe they just think it's too either nefarious or too risky to put out for public consumption, for people to even get a look at it and even know it's around anymore. I can't blame them. People are crazy.
Yep. And we throw in the book, we throw in a couple really cool museums in St. Augustine for those of us that like a little out of the ordinary.
Yes.
There's a lot of great history museums and all that. But if you want something like Osceola's Head, there's the great Wolf's Museum of Oddities, which is just celebrated their 5th anniversary, I believe. And it's got a Lizzie Borden room, and they've got all kinds of crazy collectible, odd stuff there. And the beauty of that museum is everything's for sale. So if you want a piece, you see something there you want, you can get it. And then they just opened a medieval torture museum in St. Augustine too, which is the largest private collection in the United States of medieval torture stuff. They have a lot of replica stuff, but they have some original stuff too, which is pretty crazy.
Have you guys gone in there yet?
Oh yeah, we've been to both, and they are, Wolf's we go to as often as we can. We love that place, and the torture museum, we were there, I guess, within the first few months of their opening, and it was pretty spectacular. It's the second floor of about 3 buildings, and you actually walk between them. It's quite huge. So
yeah, sometimes when you're watching a movie like Braveheart, which is, I love the movie Braveheart, and they've got their torture stuff in there quite a bit, and it's kind of one of those things where you're going, I want to look away, but I can't, because it is fascinating what they used to do to the human body, and what kind of torture one could take before, the end result was the end result. So, yeah, not for everybody, I'm sure, but I would like to go visit there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They're, for just an insight into history, and for that dark sense of humor, they've got a few fun things there that are interactive exhibits.
Nice. All right, well, let's go to Lakeland, Florida. Monsters and Murders in the Green Swamp.
Oh my goodness, the Green Swamp. We've discussed this before when we talk about Florida, on Eerie, Florida, and all this. That you see the beaches on the outskirts. And then you move a little further inland, and that's where all the cities are, where pretty much most of us live here down in Florida, and the coastal cities and all that. And then you move a little further inland, and that's the suburbs. You live a little further inland, and there's this kind of dark space. And that's where all the weird stuff, we start seeing skunk ape sightings and things like that. And then, you get to the center, and it's all the tourist stuff up near Disney. So there's that area all around it, and especially if you look at us at night, when you ever see those wonderful shots from the space station or something, where you see the country lit up by lights. And you look at Florida, there's a lot of lights right in the middle, a lot of lights on the edge, and then there's a couple big dark spots. And those big dark spots are either the Green Swamp or the Ocala National Forest. And they do kind of connect in a couple places. So a lot of people like to consider it, one giant wilderness preserve. But the Green Swamp, a lot of people refer to it as Emerald Hell, because it is just hot, full of mosquitoes and bugs, and it's 500 and some odd thousand acres of wetlands, and the rainwater pretty much collects there and is the headwaters of at least 4 rivers, I think I'm remembering. The Withlacoochee, the Hillsborough, the Peace River, and there's another one. But anyway, so it helps basically replenish most of our drinking water in Florida's aquifer. Mm-hmm. And so it's huge. And now, as Florida was growing, as settlers were moving in and all that, and driving out those Native Americans we just discussed, they were trying to race the railroads to Tampa. That was the goal, was to get the railroad to Tampa and then get another railroad to Miami, because that's where the ports were. And if we can get the railroads there, we can get anything from Cuba and Jamaica and all the plantations everywhere can get back up. So we needed to get railroads through. So a lot of different rail lines were trying to compete, and they were all just going through this muck of a swamp and and just in the middle of nowhere. And so they would found little towns and found little plantation settlements, and just little houses would just go up, farms just trying to carve out a piece of this wilderness. And of course it's all gone. The railroads didn't make it or dried up, so the whole place is filled with abandoned ghost towns, rail lines, ranches, and just and then vines and trees everywhere else. And so That's why there's so many different, stories and legends and stuff out there. That is where we see a lot of the wild men of the swamp, the Native Americans called. Also, they would sometimes say the great bears that walk like a man. And, and then that terrible smell of decay and death. We all know them as the wonderful skunk ape, which is, Florida Sasquatch, as we have discussed several times and before, and we'll probably still discuss even more later.
Oh, yes.
It really became famous down here way back in 1918 when a couple, Isham and Sarah Stewart, were found in the middle of their little ranch house, their cabin in the Green Swamp, and they had been butchered. They'd been murdered, and their bodies hadn't been discovered for a week. And the only reason they were found was because there were vultures everywhere. And so the rumors are immediately going around that it was a large animal, or the Green Swamp skunk ape had turned violent, and and had murdered them with a club or something sharp. And no human could have done this, obviously. And why would they kill these two sweet people who lived out in the middle of nowhere? Well, they figured it out pretty quickly that they were murdered with an axe. The coroner was like, no, this was not a monster. This was anything. And basically what happened was their grandson had found out that they had taken all their money out of the bank and were burying it out on the property. So he and his friend went out there in the dark of the night and murdered his grandparents to find their money.
God.
And, crazy.
So nice.
Yes,
really,
yes.
Really good grandkid. That's some good parenting right there, I gotta tell you.
Yeah. So Florida man even goes back as far as that.
Yeah.
Just some of the craziness.
Yeah, because and we've talked about this before, but you have brought up the point that you're like, anytime anybody posts like a weird story in, any group, and I think you even hinted at even just the End of the Fray group, it happens too, because you guys are one of my most oft visited guests, so people like to share stuff from Florida, and that you kind of hold your breath anytime anyone shares an article that might be a little odd because it may not say straight away that it's Florida in the title, but you're like kind of like, oh, I bet that's Florida. Yeah, like some wacko did some wacko thing, or some animal like the anaconda wrestling with the gator and all that. You're like, oh yeah, Florida, that's amazing. I love it.
Florida,
man. You gotta love it. Yeah.
Florida. Yeah, and it's so funny because we even we always joke that it's like, okay, so guy robs another guy for his Xbox machine. Okay, that could be anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes it Florida is it's his father.
Right.
So.
And the Xbox doesn't even work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, threw him in a swamp over it.
Florida. Yeah, and it's that's what we go over the top. Okay, so back to Emerald Hell, and this wonderful land that we have, the Green Swamp. The skunk ape comes back again, another where he's a suspect again in a series of crimes, and this is in 1975, and there's a area in the Green Swamp called the Devil's Creek Swamp, which is what originally drew me to this legend, because I love things named Devil. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this monster lived out there. Burglary reports start flooding in from all the counties around the Green Swamp. That's like 3 or 4 counties, and they're involved really crazy thefts, like cookies were being stolen, clothes off of clotheslines, cereal from a mobile home. And then someone saw some beast with a club killing an armadillo and dragging it off into the Devil's Creek Swamp. So immediately they're like, okay, we got just some crazy guy living out there. Of course, stories are swarming that it's the skunk ape because it's height of Bigfoot mania.
Yeah.
From Thanks to In Search Of and the great Leonard Nimoy. And so the police go out and send dogs, and they can't find the guy. The dogs just keep losing the scent. Now they do find parts of a cooked armadillo, and they're like, okay, this is not a skunk ape. What is this? Who is this? And finally, they run out there. They send a big group of a manhunt into the swamp, and they fire a couple warning shots when they see something. And the Green Swamp Wild Man was captured, and he was actually a sailor from Taipei, Taiwan. He had left his wife and sons and daughters and to become a sailor, and somewhere as in the port of Tampa on his boat that he was serving on, he got in a fight with another crew member. And when he got a little hurt, and he was taken to a Tampa hospital, and from there he disappeared. He escaped, and somehow he walked all the way to Lakeland, which is a long hike, and got into the Green Swamp and lived in the wild for almost a year. Now, we know David Sidoti from Independent Sasquatch Research Team. I think he's been a guest on your show in the past,
yes.
And he's an awesome guy. He's our go-to expert for skunk apes and Sasquatch sightings and all that. Anyway, he and I both know that there are hunters who go out into the Green Swamp all the time, and hikers out in the Green Swamp. And if they get lost for even a day, they'll come back mad and like babbling, and because it's monstrous out there. It's if you just get a little off track, you get lost for days. And this guy lived out there for a year, and he was ingenious. He would cook corn that hunters would leave in their feeders to try to get turkeys and deer and stuff like that. He had made an aluminum pole with one of the railroad spikes from one of the abandoned railroads, and used that to catch the armadillos. And he called them little pigs that nobody wanted.
Yeah, you said he really thought they were actual little pigs, though, right? He didn't realize what they were.
No, he didn't know they were armadillos. He'd never seen an armadillo. He just thought they were some weird pig.
That's a hideous little pig. I mean, bless those little armadillos. They are hideous little things. I just don't know how he dealt with... Of course, I think we've chatted about this probably in the Lost episode that we just had, but you don't really get bit up by skeeters, whereas like when I go to Florida, I just get annihilated. So I could see where just being out there for a day, and plus you're lost and probably a little scared, a little nervous, they would drive me nuts, just the bugs alone. Like when you look at a show like Naked and Afraid, I forget the big cats and stuff. You build a fire and you do this and that, but the bugs, forget it. You can't get away from those guys.
Yeah,
drive you nuts.
I just, like I said, we do not stop in. We just went to SuperCon. We just went to SuperCon in July, and we usually take the old Alligator Alley, the old one that goes, the old route where you can actually see the swamp and all that.
So that goes through the Green Swamp.
The big interstate. Oh, that actually goes to the Everglades.
Oh.
And but it's further south. But we made the mistake. We went there in January to take some pictures for the book Eerie, back when we were doing Eerie, Florida, to take some pictures. And then when we went back for SuperCon in July, we were like, oh, there's this great rest stop where we saw like 20 alligators and a bunch of great stuff. And wow, there's nobody here this time. Let's stop and get some pictures. The minute we opened the door, it was like a hurricane of bugs just swarming the garden. I'm like, now we know why nobody comes here this time of year. So we jumped back in the car. And even then, we had bugs for days trying to get them out of the car. It was crazy. So, we don't go in the Green Swamp unless we have to. We don't go in the Everglades unless we have to. And certainly not any time between, March and August, even October, is about when you can finally start, surviving out there again. This guy lived there that whole time.
It's unreal. Yeah, everything out there just wants to bite, maim, or kill you. Which is one of the reasons I love Florida, but I would not be able to deal with those bugs. Now, you mentioned like hunting and hiking, is there actual hiking trails through the Green Swamp that people choose to go on and hike?
Yeah, there actually are. There actually is, it is a wilderness preserve, so they do have some maintained areas, not a lot. Yeah. There are a bunch of people. One of the great YouTube channels that we love dearly is Florida Trailblazers. And that's a guy who loves to just go out there and see what he can find. And he found an entire abandoned rail line. It was an engine, a cable car, and a caboose, and they'd been just rotting away out there. One of the pictures that we put in the book is a rotted away old 40s truck that we found just off the beaten path, just a little ways out of the way. But to get back to poor old Hute May, our stranger in a strange land, when he finally got caught, he got taken to jail. They finally found a translator, and that's how they learned about the lost pigs and some of how he kind of survived. But he was convinced that they were going to kill him, and he was convinced that he wanted to take his own life rather than what horrible things we were going to do to him, us as Americans. And he finally did strangle himself with his own belt in jail. And just a sad thing, as they were about to make ways to fly him home and get him back to Taiwan.
Why did he think that we wanted to kill him?
Again, just a confused man who just didn't understand society.
Yeah, and he, of course, at that point, he had already left his wife and all his kids, and so it didn't start out exactly the most normal story, did it, for that poor man?
Nope, certainly not. So super sad, but but anyway, the skunk apes are still seen. There's been recent sightings. Sidoti told us about one with a ranger that drove up on one fairly recently. So.
I love the ranger stories.
Yep.
I mean, they're out there all the time. I think that would be one of my dream jobs as a park ranger. Maybe not out here, but anywhere there might be a Bigfoot. I'm not saying that up north there probably isn't any, but Mount Charleston here, right on the outskirts of Vegas, yeah, we don't have any biggers up there. So I'm looking at my old notes here from last time. Episode 102 was the skunk ape with David Sidoti.
There you go.
Yes. And I will, everybody listening, I will link Florida Trailblazers YouTube channel. So I would like to check that out as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Most of it's just, normal stuff, but he stumbles on some really crazy things occasionally.
Has he ever heard anything that he thinks may be a Bigfoot?
I don't think so. It doesn't seem to be his thing. He's just an explorer.
Okay. So maybe if you get him a few jacks in, and then in person, he might be like, you know what? This one time, I ran into the skunk ape. Off the record, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Mark, if you would please hang tight. Got a quick message from our sponsor. Hiring used to be hard. Multiple job sites, stacks of resumes, a confusing review process. But today, hiring can be easy, and you only have to go to one place to get it done. ZipRecruiter.com/fray. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. With results like that, it's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is the highest-rated hiring site in America. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/fray. That's ZipRecruiter.com/FRAY. ZipRecruiter.com/fray. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Well, let's move on to Tampa, Florida, and the ghosts of the Cuban Club.
All right. Well, the Cuban Club is by far, I think, probably... when you think of haunted houses in Florida, I know most people think of the Riddle House.
Yeah.
Some people think of the Biltmore Hotel down in Coral Gables. Some people think of the Russ House up in Mariana. Dozier, which we've mentioned in Eerie, as well, is definitely super haunted.
Yeah.
But according to the Travel Channel, they say that the Cuban Club is one of the top 10 haunted houses. The most haunted buildings in America. and that's up against Amityville, and all any places that the Conjurings happen. There's
Yeah.
this building in Tampa called the Cuban Club, and it is a must stop on every ghost tour through Tampa, especially in the area called Ybor City, which was the old cigar industry hub of Tampa. Basically, the building was built, and what happened was when these cities would form, they would get all the immigrants would come in, and they would each form their own clubs, like the Italian club, the German club, and of course in Florida we had a lot of Cubans, so they formed the Cuban Club. And what they would do is basically just gather all the local artisans and the local just the local community, and they would try to build the best place they could build to try to outdo the other clubs. It was just something that you did. And this is early 1900s, and they built their first club in 1902, and it was basically a mutual aid society for Cuban immigrants. And they were just to pool resources, and kind of a neat place to mingle with fellow Cuban expatriates. And the building burned down because they made the classic mistake. They made it out of wood, and so. Very quickly in 1917, they started rebuilding, and they built this beautiful structure that is still there today. And it's just this impressive building, yellow brick and double-sided staircase on the front. And there's a sign above the door, the El Círculo Cubano, the Circle of Cubans, and a stained glass window, and very prominent Cuban flag. And imported tile and everything. It held a theater, a pharmacy, a library, a giant ballroom, and a cantina, and even had a swimming pool and a gym, and 2 bowling lanes at the time. And for basically 25 cents a month, your whole family got access to the club. And that would be plays up in the theater, boxing matches. They had big boxing ring outside. You got all your cigars were covered by the fee, and your entire family's prescriptions were covered by the dues, that 25 cents a month. And so basically this became like one of the first, HMOs in the country. They had entertainers like Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, bunch of, crazy just stuff there, and it was owned by various board members throughout the years, and it peaked at about 3,000 members during the 30s, and it started kind of declining, and then around the 90s, early 1990s, it had basically just a few hundred members, and it started going into decay, and it was finally turned into a nonprofit organization, and they are finally restoring the building. It does host events up in that ballroom. There are bands and weddings there. Very popular to have weddings there. The stage has occasionally shows. So and they've turned what used to be the pool into a cantina. Now, Ybor has got a very popular nightlife area now. It's a lot of nightclubs and all that, so that's what Ybor is known for now. No longer is it the cigar capital, but it's the nightclub party place for when you get out of Tampa. But this cantina and the whole building itself has some very, very famous ghosts. The cantina where the pool was, there's often heard a little boy who drowned in that pool. And he's heard, they hear the echoes of him screaming for help in Spanish, and people who work in the nightclub after hours are like, oh man, this place is just scary. And then also the most haunted room there is the theater, and the theater, there's a story. It's kind of legendary because it's hard to find records of this, but somewhere in the 1920s, there was this actor and playwright on the stage, and he was doing his own play, and he couldn't remember the lines to his own play. And and basically instead of dying of embarrassment, he decided to kill himself. Now, this is where it gets odd and kind of legendary, because some versions of the story say he shot himself on stage in front of everybody. Other versions say he came back later and hung himself from the lighting. But somewhere he did die in there. Now, there are some records of some deaths in the club. A couple of the owners shot at each other at one point. A couple of the board members, and one of them died.
Wow, that's documented.
That's documented.
Holy
somewhere.
cow.
Yeah, during one of the that one actually is like in the 50s. And then so like I said, this place has a lot of history. A bride coming down those stairs did trip and fall in her own wedding gown and die. That one is documented as well, and that's up near the ballroom upstairs.
How long ago was that one, Mark?
That one is from the 70s.
Wow.
So not that long ago. And I know everybody loves the old ghost stories of them all in the Victorian stuff. These are fairly recent. But the theater guy, there has been some crazy witnesses to this guy. Some say they see him on the stage or hanging out near the stage, a shadowy figure. But he mostly likes to hang out in the men's room. And you will smell like cigar smoke. And then you will hear this guy muttering in Spanish. And he's crying, and he's just definitely upset and dying of embarrassment. Now, one story that one witness talked to us about, and this is one that gave me the willies when he told me. Basically, he did the classic. He was in the men's room, and he went over to wash his hands. And he looks up in the mirror, and then he sees the guy behind him. The classic horror scare. And the guy's sitting there smoking a cigar, and and he's basically telling the guy in the mirror what happened to him, and he's getting closer and walking up. And so the guy is like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta move." So he moves to the side, and then the guy he looks back behind him, nobody's there. And then when he looks back to the mirror, the guy steps through the wall out of the mirror into the room with him.
Yeah.
Full apparition. And the guy, man, the hairs on his arm were standing on end. I've got him. Yeah, I've told the story 3 times now, and it's still that my hairs on my arm are standing on end, just thinking about that guy's reaction to it.
Yeah, because you guys actually spoke to this guy in person. Were you guys out in front of the club, and he's like, "I'm not going in"? Like, he will never go back in the building, right?
No, we do. Yeah, no, he refuses to. He refuses to. He actually used to volunteer there. And won't have anything to do with it now. Most of the stuff we get from, we get a lot of emails at EerieFlorida.com, people wanting to tell their story. We get a lot of messages on Facebook, and even a few through Twitter now. We got one that was like, oh my gosh, one of the stories, hopefully we'll talk about it at some point, the pyramids, came from a guy who messaged us on Twitter. And he had heard us on this show called Into the Fray.
Oh,
and
I've never heard it.
Thought we might want to check out some lead that he had for us. And it led us on a wild expedition, too. But we'll talk about that at some point.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, it's funny because I always kind of poke fun at Twitter because I don't do much Twittering. But, yeah, it can be a useful tool for sure. Yeah.
It can also get you fired from Disney, thanks to James Gunn.
That's right.
Or James Gunn.
Yeah, exactly.
Or James Gunn.
You got to watch what you do on Twitter.
Yeah, even 10 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh man. So this was one of our big ghost stories in this book. We've been limiting our ghosts because we had a project in mind, and I think we mentioned this on the Lost episode, so we'll mention it here. Now Freaky Florida has gone to press, and it will be coming out September 10th. So get your pre-orders in, at your friendly local bookstore or online as those you do. We will have a pre-order link at EerieFlorida.com when it gets a little bit closer, where you'll be able to get one maybe with something special from Kari and I inside. Kari likes to scribble in the books that pre-order through there.
Yeah, you guys call them scribbles, but I'm like, they're amazing. And the pre-orders come out next month sometime, right? We just don't know the exact date.
Yeah, it should start around about 30 days before. So sometime around August 10th, watch our website, and it'll pop up. It'll be on our Facebook. Well, I'm sure we'll post it to the insiders first, and then we'll post it to the rest of the End of the Fray crowd. We'll give those guys a jump on it for a couple days.
Well, thank you.
No problem. We love you guys. But anyway, but with all that in mind, we just got contracted for book 3, which has the wonderful working title of Images of Haunted Florida. And this one is going to be a lot more pictures, and we are traveling the state as we have for years now, collecting photos of the most haunted buildings in Florida, inside and out. And this one may have, it will have a color insert. So we'll have about 30 or 40 color photos of some of the most haunted buildings you can possibly imagine. So
I can't wait. I can't wait till this comes out. All I know is you guys have to keep doing this so we can keep doing these shows. You guys know you're a couple of my all-time favorites. So if I don't sound as excited, it's because I already knew, but I needed the segue to introduce that. So you already did that for me. So I already knew the big news. I was super excited. On the Lost episode, it's cool that we can say we have a Lost episode. It sounds so very like clandestine and interesting, and like it's so old, but it was just like, what, 3 weeks ago?
Not even. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. I shed a tear or two and said a few choice words, but that's okay. No, that's wonderful. So book 3. So that is not the final title. It's just kind of a possible
the working title.
Option.
Like,
okay.
Freaky started as Strange Florida, and then it became Stranger Florida because of Stranger Things, and then we worked with the great Charlie Carlson way back when, the guy who kind of started us on this path, who created old Weird Florida back in the 90s. Yeah. And he was one of the guys we reached out to when we first started doing this, but he was very ill and he passed away a short time after, and he had told us, no, carry the torch, move on. And so, because we originally wanted to just update Weird Florida because it hadn't been updated since 96. And, that doesn't sound like that long ago, but that's, 22 years. So that's what started all this. We wanted a tribute to those guys who came before us always, but we're finding our own stuff.
I'm going to say it right now. I think you guys need a TV show. It's a no-brainer. I mean, look at all the stories here.
Yeah, we've kicked it around a little bit. But we love talking to you. And doing
I would get
jealous.
Stuff. I mean, then you wouldn't have time for me, and I'd be like, hang on a second here.
I
will find you on set.
Oh, that's when we bring you on as the expert for Vegas.
That would see now. Yeah, you guys have a whole world opened up to you, because here's the thing with Florida. Now, I know that when we were talking for Eerie, Florida, you guys had already traveled over 3,000 miles. Do you have it clocked now? What you've done for both books?
For both books, we have just hit the 6,000 mile mark. God. So that on this last trip. Because while we do these cons and we do these book signings throughout the state, and we've done some speaking engagements now. Yeah. We just did Florida SuperCon down in Fort Lauderdale, and I was happy to say we had a packed panel. That was super nice. And but on there, even then, we made a little side trip to a place that might wind up in book 3 or something else. Down the line. So,
well, if I ever get a con together out here, I will provide the emergencies and everything else for you guys, and I'll have you guys as a few of my featured guests. How about that?
Sounds wonderful.
Awesome. All right. Well, Mark, how about we travel to Miami and the Mystery Circle?
Oh, one of my favorite places in Florida. And in fact, we actually, since we were down in Fort Lauderdale, it was a short trip down to the Miami Mystery Circle. And it's funny because we talk about it to people, and people who even live there don't know that this place exists.
Yeah, I certainly had never heard of it, but to hear that people that live there, and that's something we brought up on the Lost episode, is I asked you, I was like, did you guys watch Dexter? And it's like Biscayne Bay, and you can see they constantly show over the bay, like his apartment. And I'm like, is that the area? And you're like, yes, it definitely is. Yep. So if anyone has seen Dexter, that is the area that we're talking about.
Yep. And, and as we bring up Dexter, we have to bring up also, I think we also mentioned Tim Dorsey, who's another Florida author. He predates Dexter, and he had a serial killer who kills serial killers.
Yes.
In the Surge Storm series. And the author's name is Tim Dorsey. I highly recommend it. They're very Tarantino-esque, wacky comedy adventures. They do have a series order, but don't worry about reading them in order because he had never intended it to be a series. I think there's a joke in like book 2 or 3. He kills off a character, and then in book 2, the character shows back up, and they're like, "Aren't you dead?"
Comes back.
Yeah, and he's like, it was an exaggeration.
I had in my notes here, Triggerfish Twist or something.
Triggerfish Twist is where he basically relaunched it as a series.
Okay.
And that's definitely the one I highly recommend. If anybody wants to read wacky fun and Florida at its peak, that would be a great, just flavor. And because he was a writer for Tampa Bay Times, he still, he throws in everything Florida that he can in those. And in this one, Surge winds up becoming a professor adjunct at USF and winds up giving the commencement address through a series of wacky things. So
sounds like my kind of book.
Oh yeah, you're gonna love it. So but anyway, so Miami Mystery Circle, let's get back to that. Yes. Okay, so right where the Miami River flows into Biscayne Bay is probably one of the most prime real estate spots in the state. In the state that is one of the most prime real estate markets in America. So this is the place you want to build something. And a major developer there was some apartments down there that had been built in the 50s. And so they were going to tear them down and put up nice high-rise condos, just to handle the big, population that's still growing down there. And so they bought the land for several $1 million. And then they poured more money into it, tearing down the old building, and they were ready to start the final phases of construction on one. So of course they have to do an archaeological survey of the site because that's required. And the United States is still, we're a pretty young country, a few hundred years old, of European settlement anyway. And so they didn't expect to find much, maybe some Civil War stuff. They might find some, the natives of the area were the Tequesta Indians, and they were pretty much hunter-gatherers, so, and constantly on the move. So they didn't expect to find much, when they started doing it. Digging there was super tough because the apartment had put concrete down and built a pool and, where they were going to put up the skyscraper. So they had to dig much deeper than they normally dig with these big digger machines. So the archaeology team got down pretty far. And because of that, they found these strange series of slightly curved basins dug into the limestone. And so they couldn't figure out what they were. And what was actually interesting was the architect for the new condos that were going to go up was there at the time. And he starts looking at the shape and he's like, the way these are curved slightly, this is a perfect arc. This isn't natural. And so he does some more calculations, and he's like, I'm wondering if this is a circle. So he gets the big digger to go. He does the math, figures out the area of the circle, and has the big digger drive onto the other side of the field and dig down into the concrete on that area, about to the same level. And sure enough, they found matching basins. It is a circle, and it's 37 feet in diameter. So immediately they start studying this. And of course, word gets out. And of course, people are like, oh, it's the Bermuda Triangle, or the Olmec and the Mayan Empire came up here and built, some temple. And, and this is the remains of this underground temple. And so a lot of theories start flying around. It couldn't have been the Tequestas. They were hunter-gatherers. And so a lot of New Age enthusiasts, native rights groups, and just, a lot of crazy sightseers just start flooding to this dig site. And it becomes a huge attraction. One of the earliest things I think that had a live webcam was put on this site. So people could watch the archaeology dig of this. Now, Mr. Developer is now ticked because they've already spent millions. And every day they're not building, they're losing money. And they're losing millions. And so they're like, you've got 30 days. We're not going to pay for an indefinite archaeological dig on something we don't even know what it is. And, we got to build these condos. The city, Miami is, getting all this bad press because they're going to let these developers build on what could possibly be the most significant find in North America and all this. So basically the county finally caves to pressure and buys the lot of land for $27 million and lets the archaeologists go to town. Says, go for it. Now they start getting in experts, and one of the experts is flying in, and he's from the Smithsonian, and he's looking at the pictures of this thing. And now he looks at closely, and one of the guys sitting on the plane next to him leans over and goes, "Wow, that's a pretty nice septic tank."
Oh crap!
What? And he's like, "Look, there's the imprint of the septic tank right next to those basins." And suddenly they realize, did we just pay $27 million for a 1940s sewer system? Thankfully, they quickly, and I'm sure that expert was probably the most hated man in Miami for a little while. But he got down there and they realized, okay, they get the original plans, and no, it had its own. It drained right into the sewer system, so it did not have a septic tank. So this could not be runoff from this. Dodge that bullet. They start digging more, and they find all these random holes in the limestone, and they start finding really weird artifacts, teeth from a seal, a sea turtle that was not native to Florida, and 2 perfect axe heads made out of basalt. Now, nowhere in Florida is there any basalt. So they finally figured out that these came from a tribe that must have been in Georgia, 600 miles away. And so they start realizing this is a trade hub, that the Tequestas were not just hunter-gatherers. They must have been pretty advanced. They've got a trade hub. And then they start realizing the little holes that are randomly, tucked in, they're like, well, maybe this was a ritual site or something, but there's no, burn marks. There's no sign of a fire or anything. And geologists come in and they can't date the holes because it's limestone. So it's, you can date how old the limestone is, but that's not going to tell you when the holes were dug. But what they finally realized, what happened was there was actually one of those wonderful things that happened here in Florida, a hurricane. It was actually a tropical storm came in, and the water started rising in the Miami River and the Biscayne Bay, and they realized they had to protect the site. And that's when they realized, oh my gosh, the water. They built on stilts. That's why there's no fire marks, because they weren't burning on the rock. They were burning on a raised structure. And they start realizing the holes are stilt holes, post holes. And basically the reason they're kind of random is it looks like they basically would take an old one out as it rotted and stuff a new one in. And so they start doing math on that, and they realize, how long does it take a tree to rot, in limestone? And then they start going, oh my gosh, they probably lived here for hundreds of years.
It's amazing.
And these were there was a big roundhouse and some other little houses. So basically about 2003, the site became Biscayne National Park. The dig continued for a lot of years, but every storm season, put it at risk. So it was decided that it was best to rebury the site to preserve it. And so now it is in the middle of a waterfront park. It's buried. There are signs and an audio tour available for visitors to study. And it's kind of funny, when we were there, it's basically a dog park for the condo that went up right next to it. That was
turned
originally
into a
going to have
septic tank anyway.
Yeah, that was going to be the second tower next to it. It's kind of like trying to get to it is next to impossible. You actually have to go into that condo's parking garage and U-turn to get down to this little park. And you can't see it from the main street. You can only see it from above. Our picture in the book is from us up in an apartment that somebody let us into so we could take a picture looking down at the thing.
Oh my gosh, you think that they would, and I know that we talked about this on it'll forever now be known as the Lost Episode. It just sounds so incredible just to say that, I guess. You guys said most of it got covered and buried, but how much is uncovered to where it's interesting for anyone to go look at?
They've just put markers everywhere. Like I said, it's just a park now.
Okay.
But a lot of the artifacts are still up being studied. University of Miami has several and all that, and they do occasionally reopen the dig to investigate further. So there will always be something going on there, archaeologically speaking, but not often. They only do it in the off season, when the storms aren't any threat. So it's usually in the fall, and it's usually just a very small dig, because they got to be, very cautious about it, because this is quite possibly the most significant find since like Serpent Mound up in Ohio.
I heard Kari back there. Tell her, hi, love her, feel better.
So, Shannon says, I hope you feel better. Thank you. For their very squeaky little laryngitis voice.
Oh my gosh. When I get that, I've had it twice in a year, and I tried to record once, and it was like Mickey Mouse had a cold, and then it was that bad. So I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this right now. So gonna lose my voice. It's going, gone. Is there any guess about how many of the Tequestas may have lived there at any point in time?
They're still working out that. And that's, like I said, it's just one of those. Now they, instead of just being a footnote Indian tribe, now they're definitely a significant Indian tribe, and we need, and more studies needs to be done.
Oh, cool! I had never heard about that until I read Freaky Florida. So very cool.
Yay!
Well, we are going to end in Wauchula and the Bloody Bucket Bridge. Absolutely love this one.
Oh yes, Bloody Bucket. Okay, so. This is one that a lot of people know pieces of. A lot of people know more than they think they know. And, and then when you start talking about it, especially in that area, they have no idea, and it's like, so basically what it is right around, it's not too far from Tampa Bay. It's about an hour inland, again, into that, we were talking about that kind of, creepy area there, just on the outskirts of all the swamps and everything, is a small, sleepy town of Wauchula. Now, it is growing, as everything here in Florida is growing. It's being developed. It's a suburb of Tampa now, Tampa Bay. So it is building up. There was actually a ghost town there named Popish that once was in that area and had a haunted school. Famous, and it only recently got torn down as the place was being as I said, as the place is being developed. So that was actually one of the places we wanted to go investigate, and it was like, we just missed it by a year.
What was the story with the haunt? Why was the school haunted?
It was similar to Jacksonville's Devil's School, where it was basically someone died there, and the janitor went crazy and killed people.
Gotcha.
And and there was a satanic cult that worshipped the skull, and it's very similar to the one up in Jacksonville. And I guess it just circulates around anytime there's a abandoned school for any length of time,
right?
And people start putting satanic messages in the school. Oh, Satanists worshipped here,
right?
But anyway, so there's this old Griffin Road there, and there was a bar there in the 30s called the Bloody Bucket. And basically what happened was the county went dry in the 40s, and they were forced to close. They weren't, no alcohol sales. So now the bar stayed there for years until it finally collapsed sometime in the 50s. So the road is still basically unofficially called Bloody Bucket Road. And the bridge next to where the bar stood is called Bloody Bucket Bridge. Now, there's still a cement foundation there where the bar once stood. And so a lot of people go there to hang out. And it's, just off the beaten path. And it's right next to this nice little river. So, that's where people go to hang out. Now, the legend, though, is like, why was the bar called the Bloody Bucket? I mean, was it just a rough biker bar? Was it just was it just the name? But the legend goes further back, that it got its name from a legend about the bridge. The legend involved an ex-slave that moved to the area in the mid-1870s, and she was a very skilled midwife, and she would help deliver the children of the nearby homesteads. And as the population was growing, and the farmers kept having lots and lots of kids, because that's the cheapest labor you can get to tend your farm. And the midwife starts thinking maybe there's a little too many kids hanging around some of these families. I'm thinking Avengers Infinity War here. She's thinking population control. So suddenly the infant mortality rate starts climbing in the area. A lot of children dying in childbirth. It would appear that the midwife decided to, like I said, do some population control. And she would tell the mother that the child died, and it was stillborn, but she suffocated it. And then she would just take the infant away. I'll take care of it. You don't have to worry about this. And she would go bury it. But what the legend says is she didn't bury it. She threw it off the bridge at the old bridge at the river. It didn't take long for the families to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's one midwife that's causing a lot of these, infant deaths. So now here's where the legend kind of splits. We always love when the legends split, because you get a couple different variants from different sides of the river, tell different stories, tell different versions of the same story. So one version is that the town rose up and chased her and grabbed her and threw her in the river, and that the waters ran red with blood for days, and you could hear the cries of the children that had been murdered. Another version that seems to be the more common version is that the folks just basically stopped using her services. They basically shunned her because they couldn't prove it, but they didn't trust her anymore. And so she basically was forced to go into the woods to survive. And there she was haunted by the spirits of the dead children that she had killed. And you would see her out on the bridge dumping her bucket into the water over and over again, filled with blood every time she dumped it. And she would pour it out into the water, and then it would refill with blood, and she'd have to pour it out again. And finally, after months and months, she finally just killed herself, threw herself off the bridge. Now, there's no legend, there's no evidence for that, either side of that. But it is pretty persistent. And there are a lot of ghost hunters that like to go out there to look at things, and they've come across some unusual stuff. Now, there is an old map of the roads in that area from the pre-1900s, and they do show a road and a bridge in that same area where now it's Griffin Road. Now, the bridge that's there now is a big fancy bridge. So it's obviously not the original bridge. Now, we have a story provided by a friend, an old friend of Hellview Cemetery, my old haunted house, who was like, hey, I know you guys are doing Eerie, Florida now. I got a story. I wish I'd known you were doing it, because I got a story I could have told you. And I'm like, well, we're doing a follow-up book, so tell me. She's like, oh, it's about Bloody Bucket. I'm like, oh, good. I didn't get a chance to put that in the last book, so because we were just really, they narrowed us down so much, and now that they're happy with us, they're like, oh yeah, go ahead, go crazy. So we're throwing a lot more stories in each of these books. But anyway, she's like, okay, I had an experience at Bloody Bucket Bridge, and I'm like, oh, do tell. So basically, she went out to the remains of the old bar with some friends, and they knew it was a great place to basically get away from everybody and drink and have a good time. And it was just a nice little, you could hang out on that slab, look out at the river, and get drunk. Still at the place where the old bar was, even though it's no longer there. And now they did know the legend of the bridge. So they would, it's also kind of a cool place to look for ghosts, And supposedly on full moons, the water runs red with blood. So they were looking for that. But basically, they just hung around. And after a little while, they got in their car and started to head for home. And not maybe a mile or two away from there, they got pulled over by a cop. And they were like, oh no, here we go. We're in trouble. And the officer leans into the car and shined his light on one of the ladies in the back seat next to my friend. And she said his face just went pale. And he's like, "Where's the kid?" And they're like, "What kid?" He's like, "I pulled you over because I saw that lady was holding a baby in the back seat. And I was stopping you to get her to put the kid in a car seat. But there's no kid. There's no baby." So he's like shaken, and he just staggers back to his car and lets him go. Now, originally they were like, "All right, sweet, we got away with it. We're not going to jail for drinking and drinking and driving and all this." But then they realized what he said about a baby. And they realized where they were at Bloody Bucket Bridge with all the dead babies. Who knows? Now, again, was the legend before the bar? Did the legend come after because the bar's name was Bloody Bucket? People just making up a name, why it's called Bloody Bucket? But there are ghostly children seen in the area, and people swear they can hear the babies crying sometimes in the water. And, it's one of those, definitely deserves some attention. So if you're driving around Popish, which is no longer there, but is now Wauchula, part of Wauchula, not too far from there is the wonderful Solomon's Castle, another great, fantastic place that could only exist in Florida. Hopefully we will talk about that in the future. If not, you can read about it in Freaky Florida.
Yes.
And that's only a few miles from there. So, it's definitely a wonderful place to visit. And you can go drive across Bloody Bucket Bridge on the way there and see if you catch yourself a baby ghost.
There are a few things that I think just top 3, maybe top 2, maybe number 1. You do not want to hear a baby cry when you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's just so wrong. And we hear that with some, Bigfoot stories and ghost stories and all sorts of things. But a baby crying in the woods, you're like, nope, no thanks. But the story of your friend, who was actually a part of one of these ghostly stories, to actually realize he pulled us over not because he thought we were drinking, which we had been. He pulled us over because he saw a baby in the car. And alas, there is no baby.
Yep. And she swears that he was just, he was freaking out because he was seeing things.
Yeah.
And it was only like, they didn't tell him about being a Bloody Bucket and everything. And so, like she said, it took him a while on the ride home for them to realize, oh my gosh, what happened? We just realized what happened.
Wouldn't it be great to get a hold of that cop? I mean, the chances of him talking probably would be quite slim, but it would be amazing to get him to say something about what he saw.
I never say never, because like I said, the whole back from Eerie, Florida, the gnome story, we thought we would never find another witness. And then we got that wonderful guy who worked at the police station who remembered
That's true. That is true. Yes.
And down at SuperCon just last week, I know I brought that back up again, one of the guests was the world's smallest woman from American Horror Story. I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, that the gnomes looked, very similar size. So that I could see why they thought she was, originally was a circus performer.
Right.
And didn't, call the X-Files. Yeah. Yeah.
So 6,000 miles plus traveled, right, at this point.
Yes.
And I think that I asked this for Eerie, Florida, and maybe we haven't covered it yet for Freaky Florida, and we will. But if there was one place that you could go and you could feel like you could spend a night or two or a day or two or camp or stay or wherever it might be, situationally wise, I mean, where would you go if you felt like you could experience truly something strange? Where would it be?
Yeah, like I said, it's tough to narrow it down because there's so many great places. The St. Francis Inn in St. Augustine, Lily's Room, we talk about in Eerie, Florida, is definitely one of those places where I have heard more consistent things have happened to people in that room. And then there, for us, it's Wickedemus.
Yeah.
We know, that place, we love it there. It's a beautiful, Amelie Island is beautiful. Fernandina Beach is beautiful. And then that place is just so creepy feeling. And you get in there and it's just so weird and wicked. And, really don't know what's going on, there. And the legend's so vague there. So I love that place. I think that's Kari's favorite place in the world. She loves that forest there. But, there's, and just every town we find something new, we like, and some creepy, some just wacky, some simply beautiful and amazing. And that's the state just constantly, it's so huge. And, that's why there's always something to do here. It's why so many people love California. Some people love Texas. So many people love the big states, but everybody loves their little states too, because they got unique stuff too. Everywhere you go, every town's got something.
Yeah, and you keep mentioning the con, and I keep mentioning the lost episode, but during our Skype session, which is now forever lost, you guys were at St. Pete's Books, and behind you was a life-size cutout of Edward Cullen from the Twilight series, which is, he of course sparkles in the sunlight. And it said no sparkly vampires, right? Like over his face or around his throat area or something. It was very funny. And we were talking about that. That would have gone into the recording, but alas, it is gone again. But I think that both of you guys saw that, but I had a missed call this past week from Forks, Washington, and I took a screenshot of it, and I'm going, oh, this is just too good. So I tagged you guys in that post, kind of going, I think the sparkly vampires are ready to talk to me on Into the Frame.
Yeah, they were probably upset about the picture leaking about that. So.
Yeah, they're like, it's not lost. That's why it's lost. We have it now.
Yeah, Books at Park Place in St. Pete, stpetebooks.com. That's where we do that's our local bookstore. They host us for all of our signing launches. They'll be hosting our launch on September 10th. Great little independent bookstore. And they have a standee of, their horror section is towards the back, and they have that standee there right for the horror section. There's no sparkling vampires allowed, because they have the young adult section over to the side where they're totally allowed.
Yeah, so, that's fine there if you want to buy those.
They have their own space. Yeah. They have their own space. The whole place is just filled with fun little signs, and the boxes are all labeled hysterically, and we love it there. It's home. There's a few other bookstores in the area. We have Haslam's Books, which is notoriously haunted by Jack Kerouac, and all that. St. Pete's a great town. That's why we love it, and it's ghosts aplenty here too. So
is that going to go in one of your chapters, one of the books?
Oh, probably. Yeah, probably in probably in book 3, because it didn't quite make the cut for this one, but we definitely will. It's close to home, so we'll be talking about the Vinoy and the Don Cesar, the great pink palaces of St. Pete, and more.
So yeah, it's Books at St. Pete's at stpetebooks.com, right?
Yeah, it's Books at Park Place.
Oh, Books at Park Place. I'm just all over the place right now. Books at Park Place, and then stpetebooks.com.
Yes, because they are not actually at Park Place anymore. They've had to move a few times over the years, but they're called Books at Park Place still. Yeah. That's why we love them.
Best to keep the name, right? As long as the host can keep the name straight, that is.
Yeah. Books at Park Place, no longer a Park Place. But if you just go to stpetebooks.com, you'll find it.
And where can everybody find you guys?
Okay, well, we are all over the place. But if you find us, eerieflorida.com is probably the best place. It will mirror at freakyfl.com. We tried to get freakyflorida.com, but some old news station used it, I guess, at one point for a segment. So
for one segment, now you guys can't use it. That's too bad.
We can't use it, but it's a shame. Yeah. They're sitting on it. But anyway, just eerieflorida.com. You can find us. From there, you can find our Facebook, our Twitter, our YouTube channel. We try to post videos fairly often at some of these places. And our Instagram is little teases of some of the places we've been.
Yes.
You can also find our upcoming appearances we'll be at Tampa Bay Comic-Con next week. We got another great convention in Tampa. Tampa Bay Screams August 25th. And that one is a bunch of old 80s B-movie scream queens and us, which is great. And then, of course, we'll be at Tampa MegaCon, and we'll be Orlando Comic-Con.
Holy cow.
Yeah, we got a lot coming up. And then, of course, the big one, Spooky Empire, which we got to get you down for at some point.
I would love to go to that.
Oh, it's the best. It's the dark side of Comic-Con.
Yeah.
It's horror convention. It's Halloween. It's the weekend before Halloween every year. It's in Orlando. They take over a resort. It's the Caribe Royale right now, which is a big 4-star resort. This is the biggest one they've ever done. And right now the guests include Elvira, who's going to be Cassandra Peterson. She's going to be doing her last night in costume, they say there. And then Peter Criss from Kiss, and but the entire cast of X-Files is going to be there. David Duchovny, Gillian Anderson, Mitch Pileggi, and William B. Davis. So the Cigarette Man will be there too. So that's the big announcement so far. But they'll keep announcing guests right up to the end. And Al Going Back, the author I was talking about earlier, he and I are both on the creators track there for authors and podcasters.
Oh, that's great.
You want to come down?
That's
I'll get
so great.
I got an in for you.
I'm just so happy for you guys. I mean, look at the list of things that you guys have coming up. It's amazing. And a book 3 coming up.
Yep.
And the TV show. I know that'll happen. That's a given. I mean, this is an easy in for you guys. Come on now.
I just want to get on a History Channel special so I can go, I'm not saying it's Skunk Ape, but it's Skunk Ape.
But are you going to spike your hair up though,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
you have
to. You have to do it like Giorgio.
Yeah, I got to. I mean, how could you not, man? That's like the goal. So, but we're hoping to be back on Coast to Coast at some point after the second book.
Yes.
And and we'll hit a lot of other fun stuff. So we are around, and you can find us. And like I said, EerieFlorida.com. We link all these episodes and all the stuff we've been on, and we try to post some stuff from our appearances.
Well, I will help bug the hell out of Coast to Coast anytime you guys want to get you back on there again. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, we had a lot of George enjoyed it a lot, so I'm hoping that it kind of gives us. We were on Beyond Reality last year with Jason Hawes from Ghost Hunter.
Yeah,
and he's already expressed interest in having us back, so that's good too. So we'll figure that schedule out when we get closer to launch.
When you have time, right? I mean, look at all the stuff coming up. You're like, I don't know. I need to check with my secretary, my master schedule.
That's what Kari's for. That's what Kari's for.
Yeah. We can be pretty good at keeping track of things, so,
Yeah, that's her specialty. That and drawing beautiful things.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I at least, you know what? All that I have now is, and actually I didn't post it yet. I will. The creature that she drew. And then just the screenshot of us actually doing the Skype from the last episode. I just took a couple little snaps with my phone. That is the only proof that I have that it ever existed.
I know, it's crazy, right?
But that's okay. Thanks
lost
for
to the ether.
Doing this again. I appreciate that very much.
Our pleasure. Yeah, no, we will also be updating the website where you'll be able to buy prints of some of the illustrations from the books.
Yes.
Because we had people at the con we had one person buy a complete set of every print from Eerie and upcoming Freaky. So we were like, okay, yeah, there is demand for this. So I guess it's coming out. And Kari, of course, will enhance some of those, purchased on the website for a modest extra fee.
Well, and don't forget that if you get the pre-order, you get something, completely original, special for that particular pre-order. Yeah. So, that's another, it's a great selling point for a pre-order. It's not just a pre-order for a book. It's a pre-order for something original drawn by Kari Schultz herself.
Yep, and I'll throw in some advice. I'm known for throwing in useful advice in the front of our books. When I did down there, some guy was talking about he didn't believe in monsters. Mm-hmm. So my inscription for him was, now, I'm not saying there are ghosts and goblins and monsters, but I do say that there are always more trick-or-treaters than there are kids in the neighborhood.
I love it. Yeah, and in that vein, All hail Hellview Cemetery. When is that coming back? Right? Any news on that?
The rising is nigh. Well, we're still battling the local administration, but we've got some potential investors that are looking to bring it back. So
I have to ask.
And if nothing else, I might bring it back in literary form again. In one way or another. That's something Elizabeth Abbott and I have been discussing. So.
Well, if it ever comes back, I want to come as an employee and work in Hellview Cemetery.
Yes, we'll have you do that like Chris Colstrom did for Drawn to the Dark.
Absolutely. So. Well, thank you guys so much. I love you. I hope Kari feels better and just, rest up because there's another round coming for you guys with the cons, right?
Yep. More. We're hitting the road again. So we love you too, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Bye, you guys.
Kari is waving quite madly. So
hugs from Nevada, and I love you guys. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. There's nothing. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you will understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master Dogen put it in this way. He said, spring does not become the summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring. Eliot has the same idea in his poem, The Four Quartets, where he says, when you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, "Now get up and walk across the room." And he comes back and he says, "Where are your footprints?" They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.